All right, so the topic of the class tonight is the 10 holy martyrs of the Talmud. In Hebrew, they're known as the Asara Harugei Malchut, the 10 people killed by the Roman government. And their story is recorded in a kina, which is like a dirge, like a sad, poem written for the sake of reciting on Tisha B'Av. It's one of the keynote that we say on Tisha B'Av morning. And it's also a piyut, a poem that we say on Yom Kippur. It's about the same, 10 people and their tragic deaths, but there's, some differences between the accounts. So I'll read to you a little bit of the Tisha B'Av Kina, and then we'll talk a little bit about them and their history and some more details. So the way it all started, according to the sources, some of the sources actually, there's some conflict between different sources, but it started with a Roman leader at that time. Turnus Rufus was his name in Hebrew, Tianus Rufus in English, in Latin or whatever. And at some point he came to study Torah under some rabbi. I don't know what the reason for that was. And he came across the verse in the Chumash that says, Gonev ish umacharo, v'nimtze biyado, mos yumas, person who kidnaps somebody should be put to death. Kidnapping is a capital crime if he sells them, kidnaps and sells. So he felt that this would be a good pretext to butcher and murder 10 Jewish sages. So he called a big assembly of the Jewish sages and he said, listen here, I have your Torah, and it says a person who kidnaps has to be put to death. And your forefathers, 10 of them, the tribes, kidnapped their brother, Joseph, and the punishment was never meted out on them. So I'm going to take care of that, and I'm going to kill 10 of you. So the way the story goes is that Rabbi Yishmael, who was the Kohen Gadol, said, give us time to see if we accept the decree or not. Like, are we going to fight about it? Are we going to have a appeal? So what he did was he purified himself and he pronounced a particular name of Hashem and he ascended to heaven. And he asked the angel, Michael, the archangel of the Jewish people, if this decree was indeed from Hashem. And the archangel said that it was, that it was a decree from Hashem. And he came back down and he told his colleagues, Kablu Aleichem Tzadikim, that you must accept the decree. And then it recounts, in some gory details about how they were killed. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the leader of the Sanhedrin, was killed at the same time as Rabbi Yishmael himself, who was the high priest. And Rabbi Yishmael was so beautiful, so handsome, that the daughter of the Caesar, of the ruler, it seems that the Caesar was not necessarily the Caesar of Rome, but the ruler, the local Roman ruler, said that she wanted him to keep Rabbi Yishmael alive because he was so handsome. And he said, no, I can't do that. So she said, so at least keep his face. So he said, no problem, I'm going to flay the skin off his face so you can keep the skin of his face. So that's how they killed him, unfortunately. And when they reached the place of his tefillin, it says that he screamed such a groan that the entire earth shook. I'll actually tell you a little bit about that story that is not written in the poem, but is recorded in the Talmud. in a small tractate called Smachot. The tractate of Smachot should be about Smachot, you would think. Smachot means joyous occasions. In fact, it is how do you say, it is a hyperbole. And it's actually about sad occasions. It's about funerals and the like. But we don't want to say it's about those things. So we say it's Smachot. Anyway. So in that tractate, it tells in a little bit more detail. And it tells the story of the passing of Shmuel HaKatan. Shmuel HaKatan was a great sage of the Mishnah. And it says about him that he was such a great tzaddik that he was worthy to have the Shekhinah rest on him like Moshe, to be as great a prophet as Moshe. But the generation was not worthy, so he was not a prophet. Because to be a prophet, the generation has to deserve it, not just the individual who is a prophet, but the generation has to deserve it. So when he passed away, he foretold some things. Even though he wasn't a prophet per se, but he could see some things were going to happen. And he foretold some things. He said Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon, those are the two we just mentioned, they're going to be killed by the sword. The rest of the people are going to be plundered, and they're going to have a lot of troubles coming to them. And then it recounts the story how Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva were being led to their execution. And, this was, by the way, around the time of the destruction of the first temple, the second Beis HaMikdash, which is why we read it on Tisha B'Av, which is, that's the day of the destruction. So Rabbi Yishmael was crying. So Rabbi Shimon said to him, "Why are you crying? In 2 steps, you're going to be in the lap of the righteous." I'm not sure what the 2 steps are, if it's the passing from this world and the ascension to the next world. I don't know exactly what he meant by the 2 steps. But in the 2 steps, you'll be in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. So, what's the big deal? It's just a little thing, death. You're going to a better place. So he said, that's not why I'm crying. I'm crying because I'm being led to death as if I'm a sinner. Everybody has to die, but I'm being killed like a sinner. Execution is usually for a sin, as if I desecrated the Shabbos, as if I, did some major sin. So that's why I'm crying. So his answer is mind-boggling. And it's the concept of every person is judged according to their level. And a very righteous person, even a small sin, is judged very harshly. So Rabbi Shimon said to him, perhaps you were once eating a feast, and a woman came to your door with a question about her family purity. Women, when they're menstruating, they can't be with their husbands, and sometimes they have a question about it. Is it blood? Is it not blood? Do they have to separate? Do they not? So they go to the rabbi to ask a question. And your attendant didn't want to disturb you in the middle of the feast. So he said to her, he's sleeping. So she went home, and she was upset. She was sad. She didn't know if she could be with her husband. She couldn't be with her husband. And it's like it caused friction in the home. And the verse says, if you cause pain to a woman, in the context it's talking about a widow, but if you cause pain to a woman, she will call out to me, and I will answer her, and I will kill you with a sword. That's what the verse says. The simple meaning is talking about a man who oppresses a widow, who causes her trouble, not just this case where he didn't even know that the attendant said that. Nevertheless, because maybe he gave that attitude to the attendant a little bit, that he was busy, so he caused it, and he caused pain to a woman, even though it wasn't so terrible. No. On his level, that was such a sin that perhaps that explains the capital punishment. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so the next one that is recorded is Rabbi Akiva. Everybody knows that Rabbi Akiva was one of the foundation pillars of the oral Torah. And according to the Talmud, there was a decree against teaching Torah. And he continued to teach Torah. And when he was put in jail, he was in jail together with Pappus ben Yehuda, who was a businessman. Oh, I'm sorry. Pappus said to him, this is a famous Gemara, said to him, why are you teaching Torah? It's dangerous. So he gave him an example. He said it's like the fox is looking at the fish in the lake. The fish are running around trying to escape the nets of the fishermen. So he says to the fish, what are you doing in there running around? Come out. Come with me to my cave and I'll take care of you. So I said, what are you, crazy? In the water we have a chance to live. We come out, we're for sure dead. So Rabbi Akiva said the Torah is the water of the Jewish people. If we keep the Torah, there's a chance we'll survive. If we stop, then there's no chance. Anyway, so in the end they caught Rabbi Akiva, and they also caught Pappus for doing whatever, business stuff he was doing, black market, whatever. So he said, you're so lucky, Rabbi Akiva, that at least you're going to die for a good cause. I'm going to be killed for money. Anyway, Rabbi Akiva was in prison for many days. He was actually imprisoned in the month of Elul, and he was killed on Yom Kippur. And during those days, he had one student who would bring him food and water every day. And one day, his students tell Rabbi Yeshua, one day, the guard said, what are you bringing him so much water? I think you're digging a tunnel for him to get out. You know what I mean? That's why you need the water to soften the earth. So he spilled half of it out. And Rabbi Akiva used to use half the water every day for washing his hands. You have to wash your hands in the morning and before you eat. And the other half you would drink. And now that he only had half, he had nothing to drink because he used it all for washing. Didn't have anything to drink. And Rabbi Yeshua had to go back and try to get him some more water or whatever it was. Anyway, the story goes that they were raking his body with iron combs. That's how they killed him, torturing him. And his students said to him, and as they were doing this, he was saying the Shema, accepting Hashem's kingdom upon himself. And his students were saying to him, oh, you have to come to the class. That's part of the deal. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. At least have a piece of cake. My grandfather's yard site. Oh, okay. Shrag official Ben Avram. Oh, Mazel tov.
They come with booze or just cake?
I forgot to bring that, actually. I figured there'd be something here. It probably is. I just didn't track it down.
Only soda tonight.
Only soda. Well.
Yeah.
Amen.
Ches or Zion?
Ches.
My birthday is up.
Oh, very good.
Mm-hmm. Is that class?
I'll let you know. One for your wife? One for your wife? Okay. So,
as they were raking his body,
and he was saying the Shema, his students said to him, Ad Khan, to such an extent? Like, you're still going to say the Shema even though you're going through all of this? And I saw the commentary explain as follows. The Ben Ish Chai explains, what do they mean, Ad Khan, until here? They meant, we can give our lives to Hashem in theory or in practice. In theory, we're all supposed to give our lives to Hashem. It says every time you say the Shema, you're supposed to intend in your mind that you're willing to give your life to Hashem. That's part. You're supposed to love Hashem b'chol nafshach, with all of your life. Meaning to say, you're supposed to be willing to give your life to Hashem. And Hashem, if you really mean it, Hashem accepts that as if you did it. Sometimes it's necessary for people to actually give their lives to Hashem. And actually, the Arizal says that when the Jewish people sacrifice their lives to Hashem, they bring blessing to the world. And if we merit, then we don't have to give our physical lives. We can just devote ourselves in our minds to Hashem. But unfortunately, if we don't do that properly, then sometimes we need to actually give our physical lives to Hashem. And the Arizal says that's what happened with these 10 martyrs. That because of the darkness that had descended on the world with all of the suffering and so on, The Jewish people were not properly devoting themselves to Hashem in their prayers. And as a result of that, it was necessary for there to be actual martyrdom to accomplish, that goal. Anyway, so according to this, the students were saying, Ad Kan. What they meant is, up till there, it's enough. You're saying the Shema, you're accepting upon yourself to die for Hashem's name. That's enough. You don't have to die. Now that you've done it in your mind, you can pray to Hashem and He can save you, and you won't have to actually die. And that way we can continue learning from you, because he was the tremendous Torah leader of the generation. So he said, no. Kol yamai hayisi mitztar mosai yavai leyodi vakamenu. My whole life, I was hoping to be able to fulfill this mitzvah of giving my life for Hashem, and now that I've come to it, I'm not going to give it up. Anyway, the way the Ben Ish Chai explains is that they said this to him on the day before Yom Kippur. He didn't die from that day's torture. It was torturing. They didn't execute him at once. Every day they would rake his body, torture. On the day of Yom Kippur, they didn't come. They went to shul. And even his most devoted student, on the day of Yom Kippur, he was still in jail.
Right.
They didn't come to visit him.
Oh,
because his students.
I was saying the torturers.
No. His students didn't come because they weren't shul.
Okay.
And even his main, most devoted student of Yeshua, who used to serve him, didn't come because he wasn't going to eat anyway. So what was the point? I have to take this call, excuse me.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Baruch Hashem, well. I'll call him after. I'm in the middle. I thought you were calling from the mikveh, but I wouldn't have answered it. Can I call you back? Okay, bye. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so
they didn't come
They didn't come. That was the day that he passed away from this torture. Again, with the iron rakes. Nobody was there. None of his students were there. And they put him back in his cell because they didn't want him to be buried. And Elijah the prophet came and told, this is not in the Gemara, by the way, these details, this is in the Medrash. Elijah the prophet came and told his student Rabbi Yeshua what had happened. And they went together to the cell. Miraculously, all the guards were asleep. They took him out. They carried him the whole day, the whole night, till they came to Tveria, the north. They went up the mountain. They found a cave. The cave was open. They went in. It was like a bed, table, and a lamp. It looked like Hashem had set it up there. They put him down on the bed. They went out, closed behind them, miraculously, and that's where he's buried till today. You can go outside of Tveria. You can go to Rabbi Akiva's grave. It's still there. So that's the story with Rabbi Akiva. The next one is Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Bava. What's the story with him? I say, by the way, that Rabbi Akiva, his death was like 60 years after the death of the first two, because he was killed after the uprising of Bar Kokhba, which was in the year 30 or so on, or so. And they were killed in the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, which was in the year 69 or so. So we're talking about 60 years later. But the decree happened 60 years earlier, and it was kind of meted out, over these years. Anyway, at that time, there was a decree that the Romans made against giving smicha. You couldn't give smicha. Smicha is ordination, rabbinic ordination. Nowadays, we do not have the real smicha. The real smicha has to be given by somebody who got it from an unbroken chain of people back to Moshe. That chain has been broken. There's nobody that has it today. At that time, they still had it. And the Romans were trying to break the chain because there are certain laws that you can rule upon only if you have that smicha. Certain cases you can only judge if you have that level of smicha. They wanted to abolish that. They didn't want to just abolish Torah learning for that generation because they knew Romans come and Romans go. And one leader comes, one leader goes. So if the Jews don't learn Torah this generation, they'll start again the next generation. But if they abolish smicha, that's something that can be broken and cannot be fixed. And they were right about that. So that's what they decided to focus on. So they said, any person that gives smicha will be killed. Any person that gets it will be killed. But they were afraid that people will do it in secret and run away, whatever. So they said any town in which the smicha is given will be utterly destroyed. Now, how did they know that people will find out about it? The thing about smicha is the Ben Ish Chai explains, you can't just give somebody smicha. Here you are. You have to test them. Make sure they know it. It takes time. Something that takes that much time, people are going to find out about it. It's not going to be a secret. Anyway, Rav Yehuda ben Bava was unique in his generation in terms of having the right to give smicha. Because not everybody who gets smicha has the right to give smicha.
Really?
Yep. Because to give it, you have to really be an expert. To get it, okay, but to give it, that means you recognize other people having the ability. You have to have specific permission. So if Yehuda had that permission, so he didn't want smicha to be lost from the Jewish people. He gathered 5 outstanding students. They were not even his students. They were mostly students of Rabbi Akiva, but he was the one who could give them smicha. Rabbi Meir was one of them, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. And some add Rabbi Nehemiah to this group as well. So he chose a location that was in between 2 mountains, in between 2 locales, so that they wouldn't be able to destroy any particular city because it wasn't part of any city. In honor of my grandfather's yahrzeit, please, piece of cake. Shraga Fishel ben Avram was his name. So, and he gave them smicha. And the Romans got wind of it, and they came after them. He saw them approaching, and he said to the students, "You run away.
I'll save my seat.
I'll save you some cake too." The Romans said, he said, "Run away." They said, "No, how can we leave you on your own?" He said, "Listen, I'm old. You're young. You're the future. You can't stay here. You'll be
He
killed."
already gave them smicha.
He had already given. That's when they showed up. So they listened to him and they ran. And unfortunately, he could not. He was already old. And it says they pierced his body with 300 spears. So
Probably died after the first couple.
could be, but they desecrated him.
Wow.
So that was the story of Yehuda ben Bava. Then we have Rav Chanina, the son of Trajan. The Gemara tells a bit more of the details with him.
In the Gemara, are they all together listed?
No.
The Martyrs are different places?
Different places. And for your information, the Gemara does not say there were 10. The number 10 is mentioned in the Yom Kippur prayers, in the Tisha B'Av prayers, and in a Medrash, but not in the Gemara. The Gemara, we just have this one, that one, the other one. We don't even have all 10. In other words, the names of the other people we have, but the fact that they were martyrs, the Gemara doesn't say that about all of them. So that we know from other sources. Anyway, but Rabbi Chanina is in the Gemara. And the Gemara says that he went to visit Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, who was ill. And this was, again, a time that it was forbidden by the Romans to teach Torah publicly, the same time as Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Yossi says, "I heard that you're teaching Torah in public with a Sefer Torah on your lap." Don't you know that it's dangerous, that you could be killed? He said, I'm afraid you're going to be burnt to death with the Sefer Torah. He said, so Rabbi Hanina said, Hashem will have mercy. So Rabbi Yossi said, I'm telling you something that makes sense. And you're telling me Hashem will have mercy? Anyway, Rabbi Yossi passed away. And a lot of the Romans came to his funeral because he was a very respected man. Even though he was Jewish and they were Romans and whatever, but at the same time they respected his wisdom. So they came to his funeral, and on the way back, what did they find? None other than Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion sitting and teaching Torah with a Sefer Torah on his lap. So they took him. Unfortunately, it's a bit gruesome, but they took him and they burnt him alive. But they didn't want him to die quickly, they wanted him to suffer. So they put wet wool around his body so he would feel the heat but not die right away. And they burnt the Sefer Torah with him. And he said to his students who were there, and they stayed to be with him, he said to them, you know, if I would be killed on my own, it would be difficult for me. But since they're burning the Sefer Torah with me, I know that the one who will take revenge for the Sefer Torah will take revenge for me as well. Anyway, the story goes that he was careful not to open his mouth when the flames were near his mouth because he didn't want to inhale the heat and die. So his students said, why don't you open your mouth, let the heat in, you can die sooner, less pain. He said, no, Hashem gave me my soul, I'm not going to cause it to expire any sooner. You know, people nowadays with, they get old and, it's not even the people themselves, the family says, let him go, be at peace, he's suffering, whatever. He said, no, even though I'm suffering, I'm not going to take my life even a minute earlier. So the Roman executioner saw what a special man he was, and he says, if I take off the wool and I fan the flames, will I get a portion of the world to come? Rabbi Hanina said, yes, that's what he did. He jumped into the fire himself, and they both died, and a voice came from heaven and said that Rabbi Hanina and the executioner are welcome to the world to come. And Rebbe, famous teaching of Rebbe, said, lucky is a person who earns his world to come in 1 hour. Rabbi Hanina worked his whole life for it. The executioner, just like that, jumped into the world to come. So, the next ones that are listed here is Rabbi Yesheva of HaSofer. And we don't know so many details about his death because it's not in the Gemara or the Medrash. It's just in these piyutim, in these poems. But he was a pious scribe. There was not one letter of the Torah that he didn't fulfill. And they threw him to the dogs to the extent that there was nothing left even to bury. The next one was Rabbi Chutzpis HaMeturgaman. Chutzpis HaMeturgaman was a teacher who spoke eloquent teachings when he taught the Torah. And unfortunately, they cut his head off, and there was a pig dragging his head in the dirt. The tongue was out in the dirt. And the Gemara actually mentions this, even though it doesn't tell the whole story, but it does mention that this occasion is what brought a fellow named Acher. His real name was Elisha ben Avuya. He was a Torah scholar. And when he saw what happened to Chutzpis, and he said, this is the reward for Torah? That such a tongue that used to teach Torah like pearls is licking the dirt? And he went away from the Torah. He became an apostate, became a heretic because of this incident.
Moshe asks a question.
Yeah. It's a difficult question. We don't have the answer till today. Although the Gemara says that if Elisha had learned the teaching of his own grandson, Rabbi Yaakov taught that when it says that you should do the mitzvahs and have a long life, It means a long life in the next world. Doesn't mean in this world. There's no guarantee of reward in this world. All the rewards in the Torah are for the next world. That's what Rabbi Yaakov taught. So if he had learned that, he would have not had this question. So the next one was Abelazar ben Shamua. He was murdered by a sword as he was saying Kiddush. He finished the word Ashabar lekim la'asois, the introduction to Kiddush. Actually, in the Frula story in the Medrash, it says that they wanted to kill him. He said, "At least let me do one more mitzvah." So they let him say the Kiddush, but then they got impatient and they killed him halfway through. When he got up to Ashabar lekim la'asois, Hashem created to do. That's when they killed him. So I don't think we came to 10 yet. We had Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, Rabbi Yeshevov, Chutzpis, Rabbi Elazar ben Shmuel were actually missing 2. In the poem of Tisha B'Av, in the keynote of Tisha B'Av, it only lists these 2. And there's different opinions as to who the other 2 were. Some say that it was Rabbi Chanina ben Chachinoi. Some say, I think it was Ben Azai. And I think Rabbi Yehuda ben Dama. There's different names that are suggested. It's not exactly clear. So there's a sefer called Shalsheles HaKabbalah, the chain of tradition, written by an Orthodox rabbi in the 1500s. In the 1500s, there were only Orthodox rabbis. But the reason I have to stress that is because, yeah, it is redundant. But the reason I have to stress that is because he speaks in a way that sounds a little bit heretical. But anyway, this is what he says. He says, "What's going on here? How could it be this whole story? All these 10 martyrs, and the Gemara doesn't list them. Where does it come from? I mean, some poet came up with something that's not mentioned in the Gemara. Some of them are mentioned, but not all of them. Why not? Where does he get 10 from? Where does it say it?" And then he says, what does it mean that they were killed because of the sin of the 10 tribes? There's a verse in the Torah, Lo yumsu avos abanim. Ubanim lo yumsu al avoisam. Ish bechetoi yumas. Fathers shall not die for the sins of their sons. Sons shall not die for the sins of their fathers. Each man will die for his own sin. That's the pasuk in Chumash, and that's the fact. We don't believe in punishing children for their parents' sins or vice versa, neither in the courts nor in heaven. Hashem doesn't do that. But what's the perpetuation? I mean, these were tzaddikim. These were tzaddikim. These were not people who were perpetuating. There is the concept of perpetuation, but even that is only for 4 or 5 generations. If the children continue and perpetuate the sins of the parents, yeah, it could be that the children do suffer if they perpetuate, but only 3 or 4 generations, 4 or 5, it says in another place. That's it, but not more than that. So what's this about? So it's funny for me to repeat his words because it's so unlike what you would hear from a traditional Orthodox thinker. He says, our forefathers inherited a falsehood. This story is not true. It was made up by people who wanted to get people to cry on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. They made it up and they made a poem out of it and they put it in the prayer book. Wow. Well, if you can say that, you can say anything. But then he comes back and he tones it down a bit. He says, you know what? Maybe it's true. And maybe the word 10 is just not mentioned in the Gemara. And maybe it's about Gilgal, reincarnation. It's a concept that the Arizal taught. And it precedes the Arizal too, that a soul can be reincarnated if it has to fix up certain things. So he says these 10 tzaddikim were reincarnations of the 10 tribes. And he even goes into which of the tzaddikim were reincarnations for which of the tribes.
Did we know at that time what tribes they were from? I mean, the Roman days? They still knew what tribes they were from, right? Were they from those tribes?
That's an interesting question. Well, let's put it this way. After the Assyrian exile, 130 years before the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, there were very few of the 10 tribes left because they were exiled. So it was only Yehuda and Benjamin and Levites and Kohanim because they were always clustered around the Beis HaMikdash. And there were very few of other tribes. So,
did they know their heritage?
They probably knew their heritage, but I don't think he means that they were actually descendants of the 10 tribes. He just means they were Gilgulim, like they had their souls. You don't have to be the descendant of somebody to have a reincarnation of their soul. For example, Moshe Rabbeinu was a reincarnation of Hevel. Hevel was killed by Cain. He had no children. So Moshe was certainly not his descendant, but he got his soul. That's what it says. So the point is, we're talking about the 10 martyrs. So he says there were reincarnations of the 10 tribes. He also discusses which of the 10 tribes are we talking about. Because if you read the story, there were actually only 9 of them present when Yosef was sold. Why? Benjamin was young. He wasn't involved in it at all. Yosef was the one who was sold. And Reuven exactly was not there. He was the one who said, throw him in the pit, so you shouldn't kill him yourself. And then he went off somewhere. Some say he went off to pray. Some say he went back to help his father. The fact is, it says in the Torah, he came back later and he saw the pit was empty. He said, what happened? What'd you do? What am I going to tell my father? Blah, blah, blah. So he wasn't even there. So what is it? Who are the 10 that are deserving of this punishment? Some say that it was Reuven, because after all, he knew about it and he only put him in the pit. He should have taken him back to his father on his shoulders. Some say it was Yosef. Yosef himself, he contributed. He wasn't so nice to his brothers. He spoke a little bit haughtily and, lorded it over them a little bit. His father. So there's some guilt in there. So anyway, but here's hair-raising vort that he says. It just makes you really realize how careful you have to be. He says, even a person who is a Gilgal, who is a reincarnation, they're still not going to be punished for the sins of their previous reincarnation unless they do something similar to that sin, similar to what you were saying before about perpetuation. There has to be something similar. Otherwise, they're born, they're trying to fix things, and now you're slamming them with a punishment? I'm doing my best. Give me a chance. What's going on? He says there has to be some kind of continuation.
They were tzaddikim also, who was their sin was obviously the servant. They were on a higher level than.
That's another question. What was their sin is another question. That's definitely a discussion, but whatever it was a sin. So he says, when all is said and done, what the sin of the tribes boils down to is gaiva, arrogance. The details of the sin, maybe it's a sin, maybe it's not. They thought he was after their Jewishness. They were trying to protect that, whatever it is. But it all came from, they were upset at him because he was, to them, he was the favorite son. If they would have been more humble, they would have seen, okay. Sorry?
Looks like it might be leaking a little bit.
Think so? Ooh, you're right. I'm in trouble now. All right. So the point is that arrogance. And Yosef himself had a little bit of arrogance too, in the way he spoke to them and kind of showed off in his dreams and whatnot. This is what led to the eventual sail. So he says, unfortunately, and these are very harsh words, unfortunately, arrogance is something that did not depart from the Jewish people. And this is what leads people to fights and to arguments. And we find, unfortunately, in the Talmud, arguments amongst the great sages, arguments that became very public. For example, talking about this generation, Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, who was not one of these 10 martyrs. Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus had an opinion about a certain oven being tameh, being ritually impure. The other sages said not. They had an argument back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And they ruled against him, and he refused to back down. They excommunicated him, sent him out of. He couldn't be part of a minyan, couldn't come to shul. Nobody could talk to him.
Wasn't his opinion was that it was forbidden?
That it was tameh. It was a certain oven, tanur shel achnai, an oven that was made of different pieces, with sand in between each piece. So it's not like one complete unit. But he felt it's the sand, whatever, it's usable, it's tameh. They said no. And till the day he died, he remained excommunicated. And none of his former students came to study with him. And on the day he passed away, finally, they heard he was sick. They came to visit him. And he said to them, why didn't you come until now? They didn't want to say, well, we excommunicated you. So they said, we were busy.
He didn't know he was excommunicated?
He knew of course he knew he was. But they didn't want to tell him directly. The day that they excommunicated him, Rabbi Akiva came to tell him. But again, he didn't want to say it clearly. So he sat, instead of sitting close to him, he sat 4 amot away, 6 feet away. Because when somebody's in excommunication, you're not allowed to sit close to them. So he said, why are you sitting that way? Did they excommunicate me? So he had to say yes. So that's how he told him. Anyway, Rabbi Eliezer said, I would be surprised if you're not all going to be killed by the sword. He's on his deathbed. He's not saying this, lightly. So Rabbi Akiva said, what about me? Rabbi Akiva was his main student. Said, you're going to die in an even worse way than the rest of them. And so it was. Iron combs over the course of how many days and whatnot. So in the context of that Gemara, it seems like he was saying it as a punishment for their neglecting to study from him. He was the main repository of wisdom of that generation. It says in the Mishnah that he was like a cemented cistern that doesn't lose a drop. He remembered everything. And if you don't learn from him, that's it, it's gone. When he passes away, all that knowledge is gone. And even on that day, Rabbi Akiva learned something from him. It says in the Gemara there that he had never known. So he was saying to them, imagine if you had come to me earlier, how much you would have learned. You didn't learn that, so you don't have that Torah that protects, and who knows how you guys are going to end up.
And all that because they didn't agree with how he ruled on that oven.
Right, well, they're allowed to not agree. The majority wins. But the fact that they wanted to emphasize that they were correct to the extent that they excommunicated. They could have said the halacha is not like you. It's not like you, finished. Publicize it, whatever. But they wanted to show that halacha is absolutely not like him. Don't think you can follow his opinion. They wanted to make, of course they had a reason for doing it, because they didn't want there to be 2 branches of Judaism. Some who follow these rulings, some who follow those rulings. But they did it in a very strong way.
Was that argument different from the Shammai, so 2 branches, and what was going on in that era?
The Shammai, there was not a Sanhedrin. That's why the arguments kind of went on for many generations without being resolved, because there was no Sanhedrin to resolve it. And eventually, when they sat down all together, they did resolve it, and they came to the conclusion that the halacha is like Beis Hillel.
Is that That's the day of this.
The one about them eventually resolving it, I think, is in Shabbos, in Yud Aleph. It is where it says that They weren't sure what to do because even though there was more Beis Hillel people, but Beis Shammai was smarter. And then a voice from heaven came and said, "Allah is like Beis Hillel," and that's it. I think it's in Shabbos.
An important question. I get he lived in a far. Is it because he lived in a far off village, and that's why nobody came to him? So he just assumed the situation, or he was waiting for them to make an admittance at the end. How did the excommunication begin?
It began in the Sanhedrin.
They must have verbalized to him. Where was he at the time? He was enjoying with them.
Well, he was not there at that time because then he would have known. The fact that they said Rabbi Akiva to tell him and Rabbi Akiva didn't tell him directly. No. It was the next day. It was right away.
Oh, the next day he went.
No, the next day they excommunicated him. How long between then and when he passed away, that I don't know.
They didn't communicate. Nobody's going to communicate him for that forever period, for a long period.
Well, they informed him he was excommunicated. And then they informed him right away. Rabbi Akiva was the one who told him.
I thought it was on the deathbed when he came.
No. He informed him right away, and then he didn't visit, and nobody visited. And so,
two-part question. Did each of the rabbis that were murdered or assassinated or tortured, did they know they were going to die because of the decree that?
That's what it seems. The way the story is told is that they were like a group, and the Roman ruler said this is the thing, and one of them went up to Hashem and asked, and he said yes, and came down and he informed the rest of them. Now historically, it's actually difficult to understand this because it started 60 years earlier. So were they already such great rabbis 60 years before that they were already part of this select group of great men who were going to be martyred? I mean, maybe, I guess.
Well, the angel would have known. They could see the future, I guess.
Yeah, the angel knows the future.
That's the first
one.
Right. He was a ruler. He wasn't the actual emperor, but he was Turnus Rufus. Yeah. No, that's the actual emperor. No, that was Titus.
And then the second part of the question is, did the decree stop after the martyrs were murdered?
Yeah. Hadrian was the wicked emperor who did the other 8. Now, the first 2 were under Turnus Rufus. The other 8 were under the Emperor Hadrian. And when he died or was assassinated, most of the Roman emperors were assassinated. I don't remember what happened to him. When he was over, the decrees were over. The next emperor was much more benign. And yeah.
So that was it. Okay.
Yeah, it was like I said, the Arizal says that the Jewish people needed the merit of self-sacrifice. We weren't doing it sufficiently in the prayers, so Hashem selected those tzaddikim to do it. But once they did it, so to speak, their lives were given on behalf of the Jewish people, it wasn't necessary anymore. In this way, I mean, we've had plenty of martyrs since then, but not at that time in this way. That was the end of that period of martyrdom. So I do want to mention, because I said that it was at different times. If you read the poem itself, both the one of Tisha B'Av and the one of Yom Kippur, Shag Official Ben Avram was my grandfather's name. It's in his merit. So if you read the poem, it seems like it all happened at the same time. And some people actually say that it was at the same time, and that it's not Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol. It's Rabbi Yishmael, who was a colleague of Rabbi Akiva. We know that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva were colleagues. A different Rabbi Yishmael. And it's not Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it's Rabbi Shimon ben Hasgan. A different one. And when they wrote Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, they abbreviated with a Beis Gimel. And they thought when Ben Gamliel really was Ben Hasgan, which also has a Gimel. So it's a different opinion. According to that opinion, you could say that it was all actually at the same time. So coming back to the opinion of the Shashal Kabbalah, so he says that's one example of an argument that the sages had. But there's others, unfortunately. There's the famous story with Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Gamliel, where Rabbi Gamliel kind of embarrassed Rabbi Yeshua in front of everybody, more than once. And then they had to demote Rabbi Gamliel from being the head of the Sanhedrin, and they had to replace him with somebody else. So the bottom line is, he says that this dissension amongst the leaders of the Jewish people was a bad example, and it led to further, arguments within the regular people, because they took their cue from the rabbis. And that's why, unfortunately, they were considered to be perpetuating in some way the sin of the 10 tribes in terms of arrogance, which leads to arguments and so on and so forth. So this is very harsh words, and who are we to speak about such great rabbis? But based on that Gemara, where Rabbi Eliezer said, I would be surprised if you don't die by the sword, and he was saying that after they excommunicated him and came to visit, there's something to it. It seems that it's connected to that story. So I found something very shocking as the shiur winds down. I'm going to leave you with a very shocking opinion. And it's kind of difficult to reconcile with all the other literature on this topic. And this is found in a very early source called Pirkei HaChalais. Pirkei HaChalais is a book with a lot of angel talk. It's about angels coming and going and what they say and what they do. But it's a very early book. I don't know if we know the author, but it's a very early, it's quoted in the Beis Yosef, who is, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So it's got to be about, at least 1,000 years old. So it's written by somebody of repute, somebody who's accepted, who had a tradition, who didn't make it up. And what he says is that when this decree happened, Hashem said to the Samach Mem, to the negative angel, if you do this, you're going to be punished, and your people are going to be punished, and Rome is going to be stricken with illness and with destruction, and da 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 da. And that angel said, I don't care, as long as these people die, I don't care. So then Hashem got angry at him, at the angel. And he said, you know what? You don't care? I'm switching the Jewish people, the 10 martyrs, for 10 of you, for 10 Romans. I'm going to switch it around. And according to this opinion, it's quite fantastic. But it says, for example, when they came to take Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion to be executed, the angel took Lupianus, who was a Roman ruler, and put him in the cell instead of Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, but made his face look like Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion. And when they killed him, they were really killing a Roman. But it doesn't stop there. Then Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion was taken to the palace and replaced this leader, and he made his face look like him. And for the next 6 months, he was the ruler. And every month he killed 1,000 of his officers, because he knew these were Jew-hating people. And he says, and the same is true of all of them. All of the 10, none of them died. There was a switch at the last minute. So where's the merit?
You said Rabbi Akiva was buried in
I know.
It's still there.
Yeah, it goes against all the other sources. I'm just telling you, it goes against all the other sources. With his death. Oh, no, he saw the death also. He saw the death. He saw the death also. He saw the death also. But according to the Rabbeinu B'chaya on the Torah quotes this, and he says that that because they were willing to die, just like Yitzchak by the Akedah, they get the full merit as if they did it, but they didn't actually have to die. Anyway, but it's a very fantastic opinion, and it doesn't go well with any of the other sources. It
doesn't belong to Tisha B'Av.
Yeah, it's not a sad event according to that opinion. But anyway, I thought I had to mention that just because I came across it and it's very interesting. So that's it. And if you want more information, you can sign up for my email and you can get the rest of it.
Rest of the story. Thank you.
My pleasure.
How do you just
Tell
tell
us
so
birthday-
Moshe was
birthday
teleported?
chachol is.